Hello and welcome to an all new episode of the Up the Coast podcast, the first one of this 2025-26 season. As always, I'm your host Tyler, joined today, as I am just about once a month this time of year, by my guest in residence, the great Tristan Freeman of Busting Brackets. Tristan, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on, Tyler.
Am I supposed to say that you're doing such great work over there? I can't do it at the speed of Greg Peterson.
No. I'm just chugging along. Just say I'm doing some kind of work.
All right, you're doing some kind of work over there. And the work you're going to be doing with me here today is we're going to give out some season opening superlatives. So we got a couple on the player side, a couple on the team side. I will let you pick which one. What do you feel like is more interesting to start here, going into the players or going into the teams first?
Going to the players, there hasn't been for like half the teams. There haven't been necessarily anything too much to talk about. So, but the players have been more surprising.
Yeah, I went through, we're recording this Tuesday morning, so I will note this is being recorded before Duke and Kansas in the Champions Classic. If something completely insane happens in that game, then you probably will have just listened to a couple minutes of my own analysis on it before we got to this point. But if you didn't, then it means Duke probably won an eventful, but maybe not completely bizarre game against the Jayhawks. So keep that in mind. But yeah, at this point, I went through counted 7 of the 18 ACC teams have just not played a notable game so far. Just a lot of bye game crap. And thankfully, compared to last year, they're all making their way through those bad matchups, picking up their Q4 wins handedly. But yeah, we have not gotten to see a ton from about a third of this league so far. But nonetheless, we're going to talk about those teams mostly that have played important games. And we're going to start off, we're going to draft a starting five of our most impressive players so far. I put no guardrails on this. I feel like you could just kind of pick the best players in this league. You could pick players that you're a little bit surprised by. I personally picked players who I felt like could be really good players, but maybe was a little bit lower on. I've now changed my opinion on some of them. But regardless, Tristan, we'll just go back and forth. Why don't you give your first impressive player of this season's first 2 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, what better way to start off at number one than the man who leads the ACC in scoring, Buka Okori, the star freshman for Stanford. And when we talked in the preseason, the big question of Stanford was after losing their top three guys, who among the veterans were going to step up and sort of take that scoring mantle. Turns out it was a freshman. And considering that, they lost Jalen Petty to Texas Tech, there was huge question about the guard play. But in comes Okori, who is literally scoring on any and everyone. Obviously, Stanford hasn't necessarily had the highest level of competition, so it'll be very interesting to see what happens, once they leave, the Big Sky alone. But when you have a guy that can score, 25 and efficient shooting and can shoot the three ball as well, I mean, Okori has just been absolutely fantastic and single handedly going to make Stanford competitive once league play gets going.
He would have been number two on my list. It has been so impressive, and I get that it's just Big Sky competition, but this is still a freshman walking into the college game for the first time. And that Montana game was extremely eye-opening. I don't know how many people caught that. It was like 11 p.m. Eastern on or sorry, Montana State. Montana State. Montana was the one they completely blew out. But it was super late on a Tuesday or a Wednesday night, and the Bobcats hung around. At one point, I believe they got the lead down to just 3 or 4. And that's when your young guy has to really kind of take over the game. And Okore absolutely did that. He is just so quick, which is not surprising. But the most impressive thing is the way that he knows how to use his body against bigger guys in the paint. He's so dangerous getting downhill. And I don't know how good Stanford is going to be overall. There's not a ton that the rest of this roster has made me really feel super great about, although Akpara is having the breakout that I think a lot of people expected last year. He's been a very good number two to Okore. But just because of those two guys, they are clearly not a bottom three team in the ACC. And I think we knew that Kyle Smith would find a way to get him there. All right. My first pick, I took a different freshman, one who was on a lot more people's radars going into the year, but still not quite a sure thing in most minds. Well, Caleb Wilson of North Carolina is a sure thing now. He is everything that I think a lot of people dreamed that Drake Pallet is absolute, very, very, very highest ceiling could be. And that's just Caleb Wilson on a normal night. He is every bit the wild athleticism and length that Pal had, but has this just incredible scoring touch, especially in the mid range. He really feels like an old school NBA power forward, someone straight out of the early 1990s who can back you down, who can absolutely punish you one on one from 15 feet. He just so also happens to have the ability to drive from the top of the key. Any 3-point shot that he hasn't used much, but he's shooting 2 for 4 on the season. It's enough to keep you honest from out there. He is a killer rebounder. I mean, really, he's the ultimate matchup nightmare in this conference. He's faster than any big guy you want to put on. He's more powerful than the small guy who has the foot speed to match him. And in their victory over Kansas, to just walk on the floor against an NCAA tournament team and unquestionably be the best player on the court. This was a game that included the presumptive number one overall pick in Darren Peterson, who granted was in foul trouble for a lot of the game. But Caleb Wilson just blew him off the court. And I walked away being certain that this is a top five player in the ACC right now without any in season improvement.
Yeah, I cannot wait for the matchup between him and Cameron Boozer of Duke. I think Wilson has, as you said, been even better than advertised. And with the injury to Seth Trimble, out for next month or so, UNC is going to look to him to be the lead guy. He's probably could have taken even more shots than he has so far. He's just been so efficient for when he has gotten the opportunity to score. So his number is what 20 and 10 at this point. I think that he could probably keep that up for a bit and be the go-to guy that UNC needs now that the guard play is now a little bit of a question thanks to the injury of Trimble.
I mean, he has games so far. He's only played 4 in his young career, but he shot 8 of 10 against Central Arkansas, 7 of 8 against NC Central, and then 9 of 11 in that Kansas game. And his shooting percentage is at an outrageous 66%, and that's only because he struggled against Radford in the interim, which, by the way, happened to just be a 14 rebound game. I think he's a guy, too, who has that instinct that if the scoring's not there, he knows he needs to make up for it in other places.
Yeah, I'll go next with my next pick. And you remember a couple years ago when Wake Forest had one of the best guards in the nation trying to looking up his name now because he was just so electric. Uh,
Oh my God, I'm blanking on it too because
uh,
I just want to
yeah,
talk about Hunter
yeah,
Salas.
yeah. It was Tyree Appleby right before Salas. But the guy who reminds me most of him is Robert McCray, the star for Florida State, and we were wondering who would be the guy that sort of was the go-to player for him. But the Jacksonville transfer has been outstanding, averaging 17 and 9, and the 9 is for the assists per game. And obviously, as the lead guard, he showed Jacksonville he can be a prolific scorer. But the fact that he's dishing it out, and obviously, most of them came one game against Alcorn State, but he was perfectly fine against Florida as well, dropping 29 on them, being arguably the best player on the floor then. I think Florida State could be a team that can absolutely contend, and McCray is probably going to be, contender for one of the top guards in the ACC below the position. But Florida State has to be happy that they found such a hidden gem in him because he's going to keep that new roster very competitive because of just what he can do as a playmaker.
third in the nation overall in assists. The 17 he had against Alcorn State in that game you mentioned is a Florida State program record doing that in his first game. But that Florida one, where they had a chance to try to send it to overtime very late in Gainesville against the defending national champions, I keep wanting to say back to back. I keep mixing them up with UConn, but nonetheless, I mean, we had talked before the season, and my assertion with Florida State was that if they could shoot the ball hot, they could beat just about everyone. They were 9 of 34 from deep in that game. And if you had told me that ahead of time, I would have assumed that Florida absolutely waxed the floor with them. 20 to 25 point victory. It was McCray getting to the line that won them that game. I mean, the only guy who could make shots from the outside was Chauncey Wiggins, who, by the way, was a candidate of this for me. He's just better than he was last year at Clemson, so shout out to him. But yeah, McCray has seemed to understand the moment and what is needed for him in this Florida State offense. And I do start to change my thought process around them just knowing that they do have one star at the head in McCray. But so I'm glad you've taken two guards because I always like for these type of exercises to end up being a team that makes sense on the floor. I'll take the center for our team. And granted, it's really just kind of two games that I'm putting them on this list for, but it's early in the year. A lot of bye games don't mean anything. And if you're impressive against a real tournament caliber team, it's going to carry a lot of weight. And Patrick Gongba, the center for Duke, who has stepped into the full-time starting role now that Common Malawach is off with the Phoenix Suns, was extremely impressive in their season opening win over Texas. It didn't really stand out in the stat sheet. He was 10 points, 4 rebounds in that game. But I saw a guy who was just so much more comfortable around the court than he was last year. He was this prototypical DeAndre Jordan type center, just dunk and block shots. And that's why I was skeptical when people talked about him as an NBA prospect, talked about him as a potential all conference guy this year. But John Shire is putting him at different places on the court offensively, handling the ball up at the top of the key. It's not something that you want him to do much, but he has a little bit of court vision up there. He can comfortably take 4 or 5 dribbles without the ball just being stripped from him. He's trying out a jump shot. It doesn't look particularly good, but it's something that has clearly been going on in practice. He looks more mobile defensively. You can switch him more, play him in a little bit closer to Malik Brown's role rather than just have him sitting out in front of the rim. He's so much more consistent, 9 points plus in all 4 games. He was dominant against an, albeit very bad Army team, but I'm just so impressed eye test wise with what Patrick Gongba has shown so far this year.
Yeah, I think his sophomore breakout has been as would you expect. I mean, obviously Boozer is going to be the guy in the front court, but you want him to be the interior defender. You want him to be a guy that can give you something on offense. I think he made a three in the exhibition game. Hasn't made one yet, but he's trying at least. And yeah, overall he's just been really good, is what you expected from sophomore big man. He's not doing what I would say all league caliber just yet, but you don't necessarily have to because you have him and Malik Brown, platooning and giving you 40 excellent minutes of quality defense on the interior. And the bong, but he's just playing well, and that's all you can ask for. And then I guess I will pick a center myself, and I'll go with Malik Renew of Miami, who's coming off 22 and 11 against arguably the best front court nation in Florida, and he was really good at Indiana. The issue was just how clunky the lines would be, him playing with another big and how that could cause issues. He technically is doing that again because he's starting alongside Ernest Uday, but the minutes are being staggered very well, and he's clearly the go-to guy for them, leading them in scoring, averaging over 20 a game. I think he had 20 in all 4 games Miami's played, so he's been consistently really good. And when you have him playing, arguably the best center in the ACC, that's going to bode well for a rebuilding program, Miami.
20 plus points in all 4 games for Renew. He's been 20 to 22 and all. That is pure consistency right there. But he is this magnificent fire and ice with the Miami guards, where you have his power and the speed of Trey Donaldson. I guess you can throw in kind of the jittery length of Shelton Henderson. But the Hurricanes just get to the rim in a flurry. And I say that deliberately with just a whole bunch of different ways. Renew is the key to that. He was just pummeling guys in their bye games. And just like I said earlier, the importance of these bigger matchups against Florida, a game where the Hurricanes were clearly just overmatched overall. Renew really caused problems for Ruben Chinyelu and Alex Condon and Mitch Handlockton. And what a lot of people, you would know this better than me, is Florida the best front court in all of college basketball?
I have them number one, considering they brought back 4 key bigs from the national title team.
Malik Reneau gave them hell.
Mm-hmm.
They could not deal with them. Condon and Chinyelu both foul out. Handlockton, I think, finished with 4. It was basically just because of him. His relentlessness. And I I still don't love him playing next to Uday, but Miami has such a force with those two together that is going to be really difficult for certain teams. And we can talk about one of them in a little bit. Matchup wise, I think they're going to be a problem for a couple of the big time ACC contenders this year. All right, our most impressive team from the opening 2 weeks of the season. We got a backcourt of Ibuka Okori of Stanford, Robert McCray from Florida State. Some big forwards, Caleb Wilson, North Carolina, Malik Reneau of Miami, Patrick Ungba of Duke manning the middle. And to even it out, I picked the third guy as well, but I have a sixth man for our group, Noyes Indrasitis for Pitt, who I am fully convinced, having watched most of their games this year, is actually the most impressive player on the Panthers, even though he is coming off the bench, playing just 22 minutes a game. The stats don't leap off at the page at you, but he just has such a command of the ball. And you saw in the West Virginia game, they mounted that kind of faux comeback to try to get themselves back into it. He's really the only guy that can actually attack the paint on the Panthers when things get sloppy. He's still not a super confident scorer, but his court vision is terrific, and his strength with the ball in his hands looks like a senior, a guy who really understands how to use that big 6'5" body as a young point guard.
Yeah, and also he's probably the best pure shooter on the team, shooting over 40% from deep. I think he's just looking to find his role overall, where he stands as the sort of the 3 guard in the lineups. But yeah, I think coming over from Iowa State, had limited minutes behind the loaded backcourt. I think he's been pretty good for Pitt so far on just a team that's just looking to figure out who are their their key go-to scorers are going to be, and he still has an opportunity to be that.
So we're going to get into just rattling off some superlatives here. We'll keep it on the player side. Our surprise player of the year, this can be good or bad. Who did you take?
Yeah, I went on the good side and went with William Kyle, the starting big man for Syracuse. He was the former Summer League Defensive Player of the Year, which may not mean much to folks who follow that conference because it's not really a league where everyone defends. But he pretty much did next to nothing at UCLA, 10 minutes a game. And, I didn't know if he was going to be an impact high major player, but he goes to Syracuse and he is the perfect defensive anchor for them, averaging 11 and 9, and then more importantly, over 3 blocks a game, and is one of the nation's leaders in blocks. So, and again, they haven't played much competition in the first 3 games as well. So, we'll have to see what happens when they play teams. But the fact that Syracuse went from one of the worst defensive teams in the ACC to currently one of the best, and again against inferior opponents, you still have to be happy about it. And more than anything, they are not having these nail biter close bye games that they've had in the past several years. We haven't had, close call with them yet. We'll see what happens when the schedule heats up. But so far, they have absolutely found their center, William Kyle, and it's sort of made the entire lineup work so far.
Yeah, and Syracuse has been pretty good overall. Like you said, no heart attacks to this point. I gotta say, I am just a tiny bit disappointed that JJ Starling's coming back right before their big games. I wanted to see them play somebody good with Kyan Anthony in his spot, just to see if there was any Ewing theory possibilities with Starling, because Kyan Anthony's been super impressive to this point, and if he can do 60% of what you were getting from Starling, I feel like that's actually just a better fit with how well the other guys in that lineup are playing.
Yeah, although, Nate King's, the guy they anticipated to be the sharpshooter hasn't been making shots so far. So if anyone's minutes could be in danger going forward, it may be his, since he's currently starting. But you know that you don't need Starling to do it all, but it's still good to have a double digit scoring option as long as he fits in what they're doing, especially on the defensive end, because they have really been defending well so far.
Yeah, and that it's a credit to Red Autry, which might be poison words to hit many people's ears, but Syracuse has been solid so far. We'll see what happens in Players Era next week. My surprise guy is also on the positive end. I went ahead and took Jalen Bedford of Virginia Tech. Comes in kind of a more unheralded transfer, even though he's a double digit scorer at UNLV last year. Surprisingly gets the start on opening day. Didn't play a ton, but he hit a huge three to kick off the second half. Virginia Tech had really stumbled coming out of the gate, only up four against Charleston Southern at the buzzer, but then right after Bedford hit that shot, it was the Neo Avdalis show, who I can't believe none of us took for our most impressive team, but nonetheless, um, they just went on a huge run, ran away from the Buccaneers after that. Bedford was absolutely awesome. Lights out, 3 for 5 from deep against Providence, 4 for 8 against Charlotte in a pair of big games. And Virginia Tech coming in, they seem to have a lot of the big pieces. Avdalis is even better than advertised as their star. He's got a perfect lob catcher in Toby Lawal next to him. Amani Hansberry has given them a physical force to not have to wear out Lawal like they have in years past. Ben Hammond coming off the bench is much improved over last year. They're getting these heat check games from Johnson and Shoot. And Bedford just slides in perfectly. It's funny enough that you just mentioned Nate Kings. He's doing what I think we all hoped that Kings would do for Syracuse this year. It's just that consistent, steady shooter on the wing, the guy that you cannot leave off in the corner. Force your guys to have to play 4-on-4 defending those Abdallas Lawal pick and rolls.
Yeah, and as mentioned, he's been a good defender for them. He's been a capable shooter for them. He was fairly impressive in their exhibition game against Duquesne. So, obviously, his shooting isn't going to hold up. It was 63% on four a game, but still, guard play was the weakest part of Virginia Tech last year, and obviously, Abdallas is going to be just fine. But he also has been a bit inconsistent in some games as well. So having someone like Bedford to sort of pick up some of that slack whenever the freshman has an off game is going to be great. And obviously with Lawal and Hansberry, the front court set, they can just get consistent production out of the guard play and can make some shots. Then they're going to be a team that can be a dark horse in the ACC.
Yeah, I really like what I've seen from their guards so far this year. And the fact that Ben Hammond's coming off the bench is really a great sign for the Hokies. But maybe they'll come up in our team superlative. So we'll start it off. We'll keep it positive. The most impressive team so far.
Yes, so I did mention Syracuse, but considering the fact that they haven't really played anyone, I do want to mention another team, and that's SMU, who had, they took care of Butler and, knock him, drag him out game. But I think what I like about them is the fact that their newcomers have just been playing well. Jaron Pierre averaged 21 at at Jacksonville State, but there are some questions about whether it would translate. Has so far averaged 17 a game, And then Corey Washington, the transfer forward from Wichita State, has been really good for them on both ends. And considering that they don't have Jayton Toombs, who people say was going to start for them in the front court, and they're still getting, great offensive production and they're doing just enough defensively, there's a lot to like. And obviously, Boopy Miller averaging 21 and 7 assists. He's always been known as an elite scorer, and I think he's going to contend for ACC Player of the Year. But I do think that SMU can be better than last year. They're obviously destroying the competition. I can't wait to see, next time they play a good team, which will be during Feast Week. But I do think that the Mustangs are going to be really good this year, especially knowing that the newcomers are as good as advertised.
They clearly have a type, Andy Enfield at SMU. He's playing the three big time scoring guards again. I think Pierre, the fact that he is early on proving that he is better than BJ Edwards is pretty important. This team needs to belong to him and Miller. But having Igatoglu back, Corey Washington just kind of taking over that Matt Cross role that was so critical last year. The grit guy to play alongside all of these scoring forces. I'm a little concerned about the depth. Five of the top 17 guys in the ACC in minutes so far, but hopefully Toombs addresses that. Yeah, I think they're even better than last year because Boopy Miller seems more consistent this season, and I just like Edwards and Pierre better than like oh man, some of those guards last year were just absolutely ridiculous. Chuck Harris, God bless him, but I'm not going to be tired of opening up a box score to see that he had 4 points.
Yeah, and look, at home, I think Butler can be fairly good this year in the Big East, although the Big East is down. Would you have liked to see them, dominate, a team that might not make the tournament? Yeah, but in the end, I think it's going to come down to whether or not you believe in Andy Enfield as a guy who can make a team better than what they are. But they're just so good. Their top five players are just so good. And if Jayden Toombs is as good as people say he is, then maybe that could make them even better on the defensive end as well. We'll see with them.
So, in what is apparently a hot take, and I know that it still hurts you in this ridiculous metrics era that we live in, but I don't care about margin of victory against top 100 teams in November because you're still trying to find yourself. You're still trying to get guys used to each other. And they played basically a pile of crap for a week and a half before that Butler game. I just want to see that you can go in and just win that game. So I don't really care if it was by 2 or by 20. It's still a good win nonetheless.
Yeah, and also SMU didn't win that game against Butler a year ago. They
They got
they
pounded last year.
yeah
They looked bad in
they
that one.
yeah, I mean, the whole thing was how would SMU look against high major competition? They're 1-0 against them so far, and that's better than being 0-1.
Yeah, and they got the 4 game SEC gauntlet coming into November into December that'll tell us much more about them. I took the easy cop out pick here. I have been most impressed by Louisville. I mean, pretty simple. The number two offense in the nation, according to Ken Palm, number four in tempo. Their worst scoring output of the year was 96 against Kentucky in a game where they had to let the foot off the pedal in the final 2 minutes to make sure they ran out the clock, or else they probably would have gotten to 100 again. I still cannot get over how well Mikal Brown Jr. played in the close of that game. And I know people who watch the ACC know better than most that Jalen Lowe isn't always the best guy on the court in a crunch time situation, but he is a junior who has been in some ginormous games in his career, put up big numbers, and Mikal Brown Jr., when Kentucky was mounting that comeback and it came down to the 2 point guards being able to make plays, Brown Jr. was the one who made them. Really just outplayed Lowe at the end. This team is just as deep as we had believed. I mean, Senandra Frew as just a bit player, big guy who is going to bully everyone in his sight, is better than advertised. They have passers all over the court. I would love to know how much time they spent working on just outlet passes from three-quarter court over the summer because they, 4 games in, might be the best college team I've ever seen at it. Kobe Rogers had one in the second game of the year against South Carolina State that harkened back to like the greatest works of Kevin Love in the NBA. I can't believe the chemistry. I can't believe how good this team is efficiently playing at this speed. They're just chucking the ball up. They have 10 really, really good players for this level. And they look every bit the Final Four contender that I had called them in the Hot Takes episode.
Yeah, I think one question I'm going to be looking out for is how are they going to handle Kashawn Pryor and Ali Khalifa, guys who are not playing more than 10 minutes a game as they come back from last year's, injuries. But do you play them more? Like, are there minutes to be available for them? I wonder if they're just going to go with Frew and play Hatley and Connie Roos, the former top 50 prospect. He's played well in his sophomore year. So I am curious on whether or not Pryor and Khalifa will be focal points or if they're going to take more of a backseat role, and then whether or not that's better for Louisville when it comes to contending in March.
I bet it almost kind of comes and goes. Like this team is just going to be built on the strength of Brown, Conwell, McNeely, and Hadley, like we'd expect. I mean, I didn't even mention Ryan Conwell, who's scoring 19 a game. It's just as long as those guys are out there lighting it up on the perimeter and playing good enough defense, I don't think it almost matters night to night who the big guy is. All right, most surprising team, or sorry, most confusing team. For me, right now, it's Wake Forest. And I think part of it is my just low expectations on the Deacons coming into the year. They've acquitted themselves pretty well in their bye game so far. It's another team like Syracuse that was really disappointing against bad opponents over and over again last year. They were really trying to tell us something in November. They lose by 1 point in what was essentially an away game in overtime against Michigan. But it's been the individual guys who have really impressed, namely Juke Harris, who everyone around Wake wanted to tout as a star last year. And yet on that struggling team, he was never really given the chance to shine, and it was kind of odd. This year, he stepped into the starring role for them. 29 points in a blowout win over Morehead State, kind of his signature coming out game with 9 rebounds as well. He was clearly their best player again in that Michigan game, was able to adapt to the tougher competition. But overall, they have so much better depth. Cooper Schweiger is just a kind of offensive hub off the bench. They haven't had to ask him to do much defensively because Omaha Biliew has been better than advertised. He seemed like maybe a lost cause after last year's injury-riddled season. Having Akins and Colvin as options off the bench, they just got a ton. And it feels so much different than last year. I'm still not sold that they have the top end guy that they need to really contend in this league, but the depth is so much better. I guess really where my confusion comes in when they get to the better competition, do some of these guys start to fall off? Are they the 10th, 11th best team in the ACC like we expected? Or is there just enough of a ceiling that they could find their way up into real at large contention?
Yeah, the Wake Forest result stinks because the thing that's been a theme in the Steve Forbes era is that they are good enough to compete with just about anyone, even teams better than them, but they just fail to get those quad one signature wins. And they did that again against Michigan when he arguably could win. And, Juke Harris's breakout is sort of made, Schweiger's, lack of an overall impact because he was supposed to be one of their key transfers, that's been mitigated. But the guards, none of the guards are shooting better than 37% from the field. And that's just not going to work. And obviously, Cal Meese, he can definitely light him up, but he can also go cold at times. So, him, Makai Mason and Miles Coleman, as sort of the key guards, they're going to have to be more efficient because you're going to have better front courts who's going to be able to slow down Harris and Spillers, and you're going to need better shot maker from the Demon Deacon. So I get why you're confused, but I think that they're probably going to be who we think they are, which is a top half team in the ACC on the bubble. But they're going to have to find a way to make shots in crunch time if they're going to want to be on the right side.
Yeah, and we should note 6 assists a game for Nate Calmese. So Forbes has this point guard.
Yeah, he has this ball in his hands a lot. But we'll see if that's a good thing. My confusing team, based on those who played, I went with Notre Dame because that Ohio State
I'll get to
result.
them after in the next category.
Yeah, that Ohio State result because you have your guards, you have Burton Shrewsbury, freshman Harrelson's been good for you, a double digit scorer. Carson Tout is not a scorer, but he's still one of the top bounders in the nation again, averaging 13. So the front court's not an issue. But you go play Ohio State on the road and you manage just 63 points. But even worse than that, the late game execution was just really, really bad. And for a team who what their identity is, I just looked at Coach Shrewsbury. I just wasn't impressed. I mean, yeah, Marcus Burton's not going to shoot 3 of 14 every game, but considering he just didn't have it, why didn't you have something else planned? Why couldn't Braden get the shot or even Harrelson if have him on the court at the end? I just feel like this Notre Dame team has the potential, but that result kind of scares me and makes me think that they're not necessarily going to take the lead.
So this was because our last category is going to be our most concerning team. That's where I stuck Notre Dame. And this is year 3 of the Shrewsbury Burton Shrewsbury combo. They have not gotten a big win yet. I mean, like they literally have no impressive victories save for a home one at the end of 2024 around against the top 25-ish Clemson team. I went back and looked. Do you know the last top 50 victory away from home for Micah Shrewsbury?
I'm not. I don't think he got one at Penn State, so it must be back in. I mean, at Notre Dame, so it must be back at Penn State.
Yeah, it was the first round of the NCAA tournament over Texas A&M his last year at Penn State. If we extend it to top 90, it's beating Pitt in that disgusting overtime game, the first round of the ACC tournament last year, where not one person watching that game felt like they were watching a top 100 team on either side of the ball there. This was a chance for a big statement, and they looked great the first 35 minutes of this game. I was blown away by the defensive effort from the Irish. They were doing just enough offensively in the mid range to cobble things together, and they're just too reliant on it. That became the problem. They had that 17-7 Ohio State run over an 8-minute stretch where basically the Notre Dame defense spent that whole second half shutting down everyone not named Bruce Storton and Christoph Tilley. And if it was not one of those guys having to make a tough one-on-one play, Ohio State was not scoring. But the Irish, every possession, there was just like a big shield around the restricted area. I don't think they got a single good shot from inside 8 feet of the hoop in the entire second half. The only way that they could break through was Carson Tout getting offensive rebounds, and he did that twice in big moments, got fouled, and went 0 for 3 from the line in that second half. I was just I came out so worried about the offensive approach for this team who only took 10 3-pointers. They looked like they were either trying to play in the 1980s or imitate the Sacramento Kings. And I get that that plays in well to Marcus Burton's game and to a lesser extent Jalen Harrelson's, but I just don't feel like they have an ability to get to the rim in the toughest moments. Jalen Harrelson is filling in admirably for what Tay Davis did last year, but I watched that game feeling like they needed to have both of those guys on this team. And they missed Tay Davis so bad in that second half in Columbus. They just needed somebody to put his head down, crash through three guys, and see what the hell happened. And they don't have it. Unless Harrelson becomes that guy by January, I don't think they're going to get it. And if they don't, I just don't see a path for Notre Dame to be a true contender.
Yeah, I didn't want to be too harsh because it was a true road game, and I thought their defense was fine enough. So I thought that was, okay. But there was one team that I feel more concerned about based on what I've seen from their whole body of work.
It was like, yeah, it's a tough game, but you need to be better than just that end of the game was such a disaster. Like you have to score more than 17 points over the last 13 minutes of a game when you have Marcus Burton, Jalen Harrelson, and Braden Shrewsbury. Like there was a little too much just kind of asking Sir Muhammad to take over the game. Like he's not the guy to do that. They went that way for about 3 minutes, and I just don't know what the plan was for the Irish. They're going to have to do a little bit of soul searching and finding ways. If Harrelson or Burton's not going to get better as a dribble penetrator, they're going to have to find ways to generate threes for guys who are not named Braden Shrewsbury. Like they're going to have to find the way to make Garrett Sundra or Cole Serta become a more important part of this team because those guys can unlock something that the rest of this roster just can't. All right, your most concerning team is
Yeah, I went with the Clemson Tigers because the biggest question for me is how are they going to get better? And you have teams who have young players who obviously will get better, and other teams who, maybe you'll transfers or injuries, but they played well at Georgetown. I don't hate that. The problem is their leading scorer, their top two scorers currently come off the bench, and no one's averaging more than 11 points a game. And it's a balanced team, but there's just a lack of shooting, and the guard play is real concern because I thought that Dylan Hunter could take a step up, and he's currently shooting 34% from the field. Justin Porter, the transfer from Middle Tennessee, shooting under 30% from the field. They struggled against Georgetown. Nick Davidson and Carter Welling are solid guys, but they're not putting up huge stats either. And this is a Clemson team who, if they go up against any teams with size who won't let their forwards go off, I'm going to be very concerned how they're going to be able to score because they're not a good shooting team, and I don't know if their guards are good enough to carry the load to make them competitive.
yeah. So my weekly ACC update over on Busting Brackets, go check that out on Friday morning this week for a new edition. But I had this as the game of the week between Clemson and Georgetown because we were going to learn something about the Tigers who had really kind of gamed the metrics their first three, just blowing out opponents. One of the guards you didn't even mention, Ace Buckner, was really impressive in those first three bye games. And I was just wondering how he was going to look against the Georgetown veteran transfer guards. And how he looked was 2 for 7 shooting from the field for a grand total of 6 points. Because all of these guys you mentioned, Porter and Hunter, they all feel like they have ceilings on their level of play. And that ceiling is just not good enough for Clemson to be an NCAA tournament team. To me, it feels like it's got to be Buckner or maybe a surprise Zach Foster breakout. One of these young guards has to really explode for the Tigers. That Georgetown game was very, very concerning for Clemson going forward. And we'll see. I mean, West Virginia is going to give them a really fascinating test on Friday that we're going to learn a lot out of as well. So, all right, we still got a little bit of time. We're gonna make this a quicker show this year, but since we got you on, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I kind of hope I am. I don't anticipate any standalone 35-minute Pitt Panther conversations on this show this year. So, since you're here, you are an expert on this Pitt team. We're going to do a little bit of a Pitt corner on your episodes here. So, just number one biggest takeaway through 5 games from the Panthers.
Biggest takeaway is that they're still looking to find something that works. We've seen different lineups. We've seen, I mean, if we before if this episode, if we did this episode on Sunday, then the most surprising player I would have talked about would have been Barry Dunning Jr. in a bad way because he had an awful start to the Panthers' career, and if you added the 2 exhibition games where he was bad, it was brutal because he averaged, 17 a game in South Alabama. He was supposed to be the lead scorer for Pitt if you projected them as a tournament team. And he basically got 2 minutes against West Virginia. And, he had 23 against Bucknell, finally made some shots. If Pitt's going to be any good, any competitive, they need someone like Dunning who can shoot the ball, who can create his own shot, and just take the pressure off of the others because you got Cam Corrin averaging 35 minutes a game right now. That is not sustainable, even though he's played well. You have two big lineups for him and Papa Conte, and that sort of stunts the offense at times. You have the young guys in Mari Witherspoon and as you mentioned Idrisitis who are going to have their ups and downs. Barry Dunning, who was basically out of the rotation a week ago, if he's now back in there and has a big game starting with UCF on Thursday, then all of a sudden, this Pitt team can have something that can sort of boost them up, that can sort of make them a contender. So this Thursday is going to be very interesting to see whether or not that was a one-off from him.
Yeah, and Dunning specifically, like just watching him in person, just non-existent. He's just kind of running up and down the court up until that Bucknell game. I mean, even against Longwood in Eastern Michigan, he wasn't really making much of an impact. But a little trivia question for you here. Do you know who leads the ACC in minutes percentage to this point?
I would assume Donald Hand of Boston College, since they can't operate without him on the floor.
He's sixth. He's actually not even number one on his own team because Fred Payne is. I think he got in foul trouble in one of their games.
That would explain it.
Yeah, so the SMU guards Edwards and Miller are second and third. Corey, we talked about it fourth. Number one is Cam Corrin.
It feels like it. It's Papa Conte has been much more playable, but the fact that the team really goes through Corrin, who plays all the time. I mean, looking at the first 4 games, he played 35 minutes plus in each of them, and even with foul trouble. I mean, he was a guy who was in a platoon at Florida State. He was his minutes moved up last year. But the fact that he has to play this much is going to be a concern because I'm not sure he can last all the way through playing those kind of minutes.
Just think it's to a bad sign that he is clearly your leading minutes getter. I mean, we could probably spend the next 15 minutes on why does Papa Conte not play more because you mentioned he looks playable again. He looked super playable for like a good month last year and could never get out on the court. I mean, Pitt by conference play, they better hope that things surprisingly take a turn with Deshaun Jackson's heart issue, which unfortunately seems like that's probably less likely than more so, but they really, really, really need that other body at the center position. But yeah, that UCF game is going to tell us a lot because Pitt was pretty impressive through the exhibition, the 3 bye games, and then West Virginia just completely waxed the floor with them. Like embarrassing should this game be turned off at halftime level beatdown.
Yeah, and UCF will not defend like West Virginia did. So if you're struggling to score against UCF, then you're going to have massive problems the rest of the way.
So, all right, we'll wrap it up here. We'll save the deep Amari Witherspoon conversations till we get to watch him play a couple more weeks. But I did kind of put together a mock list of ACC true freshmen, not counting the older pros like the Grunlows and the Frews, just these actual real freshmen. First of all, it's unbelievable how good this group is, but Amari Witherspoon deserves to be on there with like the Kyan Anthonys of the world, Shelton Henderson, Ace Buckner, Caden Boozer, Matt Abel. I had him somewhere in that group below the like 6 or 7 guys at the top. But Tristan, you'll be writing all about Pitt. You'll be writing all about plenty of teams all over the country. Where can the good people find your work?
Yeah, you can follow me at several places, but the main spot to find me at is Bustin' Brackets and covered all the Champions Classic games, and I'll be doing my ACC Power Rankings hopefully this weekend before Feast Week.
Yeah, everyone go on and read that. You will have just a wealth of coverage across Feast Week. So everyone go check out Tristan on Busting Brackets. Be sure to follow his work. Be sure to keep following this show at Up the Coast on Twitter. If you have any suggestions, anything that you like about the show, anything you don't like, be sure to reach out on there. Or if you prefer, you can send an email upthecoastpod at gmail. Sorry, it's at upthecoastpod on Twitter, upthecoast at gmail.com if you prefer that way. Be sure to come back. We'll have a new episode coming for you. Team specific. Don't know what team yet, but early in Feast Week before Thanksgiving, this show will be back, so keep an eye out for that.